20 of the country's finest doctors crowded around the bed of Viktor Morozov, the steel billionaire whose empire stretched from Moscow to the Pacific, each of them helpless before a mysterious illness that drained his life hour by hour. Outside their circle, invisible as always, moved Galina Sedorovna, the black housekeeper with the quiet hands and the watchful eyes. While the physicians argued and syringes flashed under electric light, she carried tea and towels, unnoticed. But in her silence lived an old knowledge and a stubborn compassion, and she was about to see what no one else would see. Snow clung to the windows of the Morozov estate like ash to a dying fire. Inside, a hush lay over the great hall where 20 doctors stood, their black coats and pale faces reflected in the chandelier's crystal drops. At the center of the room, beneath a canopy of velvet, lay Viktor Morozov, billionaire, steel magnate, benefactor to half of St. Petersburg and tyrant to the other half. His breathing rattled like an iron door caught in a storm. The doctors spoke in whispers, their Latin terms cracking like brittle frost. One wiped his brow, another examined the pulse with trembling fingers. They had tried everything. Imported medicine from Switzerland, oxygen tanks from Germany, a secret therapy from Israel. Victor's body remained an impenetrable fortress of suffering. The man who could buy anything now could not buy breath. From the far corner, just behind the thick oak door, stood Galina Sidorovna, the housekeeper. Her dark skin, rare in that part of Russia, had long been the subject of murmured gossip among the neighbors. She had come from Arkhangelsk 20 years ago, a child of a Congolese sailor and a Russian nurse. She wore her plain gray dress and headscarf as armor. She knew the patterns of this house as one knows the lines of a palm. The creak of the stair, the sigh of the radiators, the faint perfume of beeswax and iron. She held a tray of tea glasses, steam rising like prayers. She knew not to look at Viktor directly. She served him since the day his second wife left, and his first factory burned. He was her master, but she was also his witness. The woman who cleaned his rooms when his mistresses fled, who ironed his shirts when he cried drunk into the carpet. "Nothing works," muttered one of the doctors, a man with sharp spectacles and trembling lips. "We have tried everything. Maybe he wants to die," whispered another. "Sometimes the body chooses." Galina's ears, sharpened by years of overhearing things, caught every word. She glanced at Viktor, his once imperious jaw slack, his eyes rolling beneath thin lids. He looked smaller than she remembered, like a boy who had stolen a man's suit. She turned away, placed the tray on the samovar table, and retreated. But something inside her tightened. She knew something was wrong, not just illness, but wrongness. She had seen him last night, shoving aside his supper of borscht and black bread, muttering about his brother Mikhail, about a betrayal from the past. He had clawed at his neck, as though something strangled him from inside. She retreated to the kitchen, where the old tiled stove hissed with steam. Titiana the cook stood with her arms deep in dough, shaping pierogi filled with cabbage. "They will not save him," Tatiana muttered without looking up. "The rich die differently, but they die all the same." Galina sat at the little wooden table, her fingers curling around a chipped mug. Snow swirled outside, clinging to the birch trees like white cloth on mourners. She remembered the first time she saw Viktor. A man so powerful, he seemed to command the snow to fall where he wished. He had taken her in when no one else would hire her, had given her a room in the attic, a wage, a chance to survive. But he also reminded her every day of her place. "You are my shadow," he once said. "The floor beneath my shoes." She sipped her tea and thought of her grandmother's stories. Her grandmother had been a healer in a small village near Arkhangelsk, a woman who mixed herbs and prayers, who believed illness was sometimes a knot in the soul rather than the flesh. Sometimes, the old woman had said, it is not the doctor you need but the listener. The clock struck 3. She rose again, wiping her hands on her apron. She moved silently back toward the great hall. The doctors were preparing an injection. One stood with a syringe of translucent fluid. Victor groaned faintly, his lips blue. His eldest daughter, Ekaterina, stood at the far side of the bed, wrapped in a sable coat though the room was warm. She clutched a rosary, fingers moving without prayer. Her face was all marble and mascara. Papa, she whispered. Papa, stay with us? Victor's eyes fluttered open. For a moment they met Galina's. Something flickered there, terror, pleading. His lips moved but no sound came. Galina froze. She felt as though an invisible hand had brushed her cheek. The doctor injected the fluid. Victor convulsed, then lay still. Silence fell. Galina saw something, not in the medical sense but in the human sense. Victor's shirt collar sat askew, revealing a small, almost invisible mark at the base of his throat. A puncture, a swelling. Not a needle from the doctor's. It looked older. It looked like an insect bite or the prick of a thorn. She remembered seeing the same mark 2 nights ago when she brought him tea. He had been scratching at it furiously. She whispered to herself, "This is not a disease. This is not sickness." But how to speak? She was the housekeeper, the outsider. No one listened to the one who scrubbed the floors. She retreated again, but her heart beat like a drum. In the corridor she met Pavel, the driver, who was polishing Victor's boots for no reason except habit. "How is he?" Pavel asked softly. "Dying," Galina said. Maybe being killed." Pavel looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," she said, and hurried away. That night she could not sleep. From her attic room she heard the doctors arguing downstairs, the creak of leather bags, the hiss of the samovar. She stared at the ceiling beams, tracing the cracks like veins. Memories flooded her. Her grandmother's hands crushing juniper berries, her mother's lullabies, the bitter winters of Arkhangelsk. She thought of Victor's eyes, pleading. She thought of that mark on his neck. In her mind's eye it grew, pulsed, and spoke. Just before dawn she rose, wrapped herself in her wool shawl, and crept down to the kitchen. The house slept, heavy with silence. She brewed tea with thyme and honey, an old remedy for courage. Then she took a small candle from the drawer and lit it, whispering an Orthodox prayer she barely remembered. Wubu, Ozku. Lord, have mercy. She slipped into Victor's chamber. He lay alone, the doctors having retired to the guest rooms to snatch an hour of sleep. Snowlight filled the room. His breathing was ragged. She set the candle on the bedside table. "Mr. Morozov," she whispered. "It is Galina." His eyes opened. Faint, cloudy, but aware. "Do you remember," she whispered, "the winter your brother came? The quarrel. A flicker of something, guilt, recognition. I saw the mark on your neck," she said softly. "It is not the doctor's doing. Tell me what happened." His lips moved. She leaned closer, catching the scent of sweat and iron. "Tea," he croaked. "Tea from her." "Her." "Ekaterina, or another woman." He tried again, but the words collapsed into a cough. Galina's mind raced. "Tea from her." 2 days ago, Ekaterina had brought him a tray herself, unusual for a daughter so distant. Galina had thought it a gesture of love, but Victor had refused to drink it, demanding fresh tea. Later, she saw him sipping it anyway, after she left. Her grandmother's words came again. "Poison is a shadow. It hides where love pretends." She touched the swollen mark at his neck. It felt hot, hard, not like an infection but like an injected substance. Her breath caught. She understood, not fully but enough. This was no illness. This was deliberate. She stood, trembling. She could go to the police. But who would believe a housekeeper against a billionaire's daughter? She could tell the doctors. But perhaps they were complicit or too proud to admit their error. In Russia, power twisted everything like wind twists birch branches. Victor's hand shot out weakly, clutching hers. His eyes burned with one last command. "Save me." The words fell like stones. Galina swallowed. "I will try," she whispered. She left the room, heart pounding, and went to the kitchen. There she gathered what she could. Activated charcoal from the stove filters milk. A small jar of pickled sorrel leaves her grandmother had once sworn would draw poison from the blood. She mashed them together, whispering prayers she barely believed. The samovar hissed like a serpent. She returned, carrying the bowl and a glass of milk. Victor's eyes followed her. "It will taste bitter," she said. "But swallow." He obeyed, gagging but drinking. She held the bowl to his lips, spooned the mash to his tongue. "Good," she whispered. "Good." She sat beside him, holding his hand as the hours passed. Dawn came pale and cold through the curtains. A distant church bell tolled. Victor slept, his breath marginally steadier, the blue tinge fading from his lips. Outside the door, someone moved. Galina stood quickly, wiping the bowl, hiding the spoon. The door opened and Ekaterina entered, her sable coat now replaced by a silk dressing gown. Her face froze when she saw Galina at the bedside. "What are you doing here?" Ekaterina demanded. "Bringing him tea," Galina said quietly. Ekaterina's eyes flicked to the empty glass. "I told you to leave this to the doctors." "They are asleep," Galina said. He was thirsty. Ekaterina stepped closer, her perfume heavy and sweet. "You are overstepping." Galina lowered her gaze. "Yes, Barinya," she murmured. "Forgive me." Ekaterina glanced at her father, then back at Galina. "If you care for your job, do not touch him again." Galina bowed her head. "Of course." Ekaterina lingered a moment, then left, closing the door softly. Galina exhaled, trembling. She turned back to Victor. He slept still, but his hand twitched, clutching at the sheet. A small bubble of breath escaped his lips, almost a sigh of relief. Galina whispered, "Hold on, Mr. Morozov. Just hold on." Far away, beyond the estate walls, the Neva River lay frozen, the city shrouded in snow. Somewhere a train horn called across the morning, a sound of departure and arrival. Galina felt that everything, her life, Victor's, the dark knot of secrets, was rushing toward a point where silence would shatter. The morning thickened like cold milk poured into tea. Galina moved through the kitchen in a trance, wiping counters that were already clean, listening for every sound from upstairs. The 20 doctors, stiff with shame and fatigue, had gathered again in the drawing room to whisper theories over weak coffee. None of them spoke to her, though some cast suspicious glances. They had expected to preside over a grand medical miracle. Instead, they stood on the edge of a scandal. Galina's hands trembled as she chopped dill for Tatiana's borscht. Every motion carried memory, the faint smell of kerosene, her grandmother's hut on the White Sea, the sound of salt ice cracking under boots. In her mind's eye, she saw Victor's swollen neck again, the small puncture, the way he whispered, "Tea from her." And she knew she had crossed a line no servant was meant to cross. She had touched a forbidden truth. Around noon, the bell rang for lunch. Platters of rye bread and bowls of beet. Red borscht steamed on the long table under the chandelier. The doctors spooned their soup silently. Ekaterina sat at the head of the table in her sable coat again, though inside it was warm. Her eyes were fixed, luminous, like a cat's. She ate nothing, only drank tea from a porcelain cup. Galina stood at the samovar, pouring black tea into faceted glasses, the steam blurring her vision. Her heart hammered as she watched Ekaterina's delicate hands. She remembered the rumor Tatiana had once whispered, that Ekaterina had been furious when her father refused to sign over half the company to her name. A quarrel, a slammed door, a silence that lasted months. Now here she was, poised, glacial. When lunch ended, Galina slipped upstairs to Victor's room. He lay awake, eyes clearer than before. She saw a faint flush in his cheeks, a tremor of strength in his hands. He whispered, "What, did you give it to me?" "An old remedy," she murmured. "Charcoal milk, sorrel. To pull out the poison." He swallowed painfully, but his lips curled faintly. "I knew it wasn't sickness." "Ooh, Mr. Morozov?" she asked softly. "Who tried to harm you?" His eyes darted to the door. "She wants everything," he rasped. "She thinks I ruined her mother. She doesn't know the truth." "What truth?" Galina leaned close. His eyelids drooped. "There is a letter," he whispered. In the icon behind the Mother of God letter to Mikhail, Galina turned toward the heavy Orthodox icon hanging on the far wall. The Mother of God of Kazan, framed in silver and studded with garnets. Every Russian household had one, but this one was nearly as large as a window. She remembered polishing its frame but had never touched the back. She hesitated. "I will find it," she said. "Rest." His hand caught hers, a tremor of desperation. "If I die, give it to her. Tell her I loved." His words dissolved into a cough, his head falling back on the pillow. Galina rose, heart pounding. She crossed the room to the icon. She touched the cold silver frame. Her grandmother had taught her to cross herself before touching an icon. She did so now, whispering, "Lay bayuv way. Lord, forgive me." She lifted the icon carefully from the wall. Behind it, tucked into a narrow hollow, lay an envelope sealed with wax. She slipped it into her apron pocket, replaced the icon, and turned back. So Victor had fallen into a light, uneasy sleep. Galina fled the room, descending to her attic to read the letter. The stair creaked like an old voice warning her. In her room, she lit a stub of candle and opened the envelope. The handwriting inside was Victor's, firm yet trembling. "Ekaterina," it began. "If you find this after my death, know the truth. Your mother did not die from my neglect but from her own illness, long hidden from you. I paid for every doctor, every priest, but she would not let you see her suffering. Mikhail did not betray me. It was I who betrayed him, taking from him what was his by birth. I built an empire on another man's sweat. For this I am ashamed. I have tried to make amends, but perhaps too late. Forgive me, daughter. Do not repeat my sins. Papa." Galina lowered the letter, her hands trembling. She saw suddenly how the pieces fit. Ekaterina's rage, the hidden mark, the poisoned tea. The daughter believed her father had killed her mother, stolen her future, and betrayed her uncle. She had decided to repay betrayal with betrayal. But the truth in the letter could undo everything. The candle flickered, casting long shadows on the walls of her small room. Galina thought of her own father, the Congolese sailor she had never met, of her mother who died young. She thought of Victor's harsh voice, his lonely meals, his trembling hand clutching hers. She felt, for the first time, pity. She knew she had to tell Ekaterina. Yet she also knew what danger she risked. A servant accusing the mistress of attempted murder would likely vanish under the Neva ice. Night fell again, blue and brittle. Galina spent it walking the corridors like a ghost, holding the letter in her apron. The house creaked, the snow hissed against the windows, and somewhere a church bell tolled as though announcing her own doom. Just after midnight, she found herself standing outside Ekaterina's door. She raised her hand to knock, lowered it, then knocked anyway. The door opened. Ekaterina stood in a silk robe, her hair loose like dark water. "What is it?" she asked sharply. Galina bowed her head. "Barinya," she whispered. "I have something you should see." "What?" Galina held out the letter without speaking. Ekaterina frowned, snatched the envelope, tore it open. Her eyes darted across the page. The silence stretched. Then her hands began to tremble. She read again, slower. Her lips moved silently over the words, "Forgive me, daughter." She looked up, her face pale, almost green. "Where did you get this?" "Your father kept it behind the icon," Galina said softly. "He wanted you to know." Ekaterina stared at her, breathing hard. Her pupils were wide, like a hunted animal's. "He lies," she whispered. "He always lies." "It is the truth," Galina said gently. "I think he never meant to hurt you." Ekaterina's hand went to her mouth, then to her temple. She sank onto a chair. "I only wanted him to see me," she said in a voice so small Galina barely heard. "All my life, only his factories, his mistresses, his dinners with ministers. Never me. When Mama died, he didn't even let me see her. He said it would disturb my studies." "I am sorry," Galina whispered. Ekaterina dropped the letter on the carpet, staring at the floor. I thought if he suffered, if he begged, he would finally understand what he did to us. Galina knelt, retrieving the letter, placing it on the table. He understands, she said. He asked me to tell you he loved you. Ekaterina looked at her sharply, eyes shining. Loved, she whispered. Yes, Galina said. Loved. For a moment the air between them trembled like glass. Then Ekaterina's face hardened again. It's too late, she whispered. Even if I stop now, he may already... She broke off, pressing her fist to her eyes. Oh God, what have I done? You can still save him, Galina said. Help me. Ekaterina dropped her hands. How? We must bring him to a hospital immediately, Galina said. Tell the doctors the truth. Let them treat the poisoning. If we wait, he will die. Ekaterina stared at her, then at the window, where snow swirled under the moon. If I confess, they will imprison me. You are his daughter, Galina said softly. He may forgive you. Ekaterina laughed bitterly. Forgive? He will disown me, crush me. That is who he is. Galina rose slowly. He is also dying. Decide quickly. Ekaterina closed her eyes, her shoulders shaking. Then she whispered, all right. Call the doctors. Tell them I lied. Galina nodded and left before she could change her mind. She hurried to the guest rooms where the doctors lay like corpses in their clothes. She shook the chief physician awake. Poisoning, she whispered. Your patient has been poisoned. You must act now. The man blinked at her, then at the urgency in her face. What are you saying? I am saying? Galina hissed. That if you do not act, he will die, and you will be blamed. Something in her tone broke through his fog. He rose, pulling on his coat, shouting for his assistants. Within minutes the hall filled with motion. Orders barked in Russian and German, vials prepared, charcoal and antidotes administered. They worked like soldiers under fire. Ekaterina appeared, pale but upright, saying nothing. She stood by the door as the doctors began a stomach pump and IV, a flurry of chemical names. She neither flinched nor fled. Galina watched from the corner, heart pounding, praying silently in a mixture of Russian and her grandmother's old African chants. She had never believed in God with certainty, but now she begged the invisible to intervene. Hours passed. At dawn, Victor's breathing steadied. His pulse strengthened. His eyes flickered open. The chief physician sagged against the wall, whispering, as I, he will live. Ekaterina made a small sound, like a sob strangled in her throat. She turned and fled the room. Galina followed her down the corridor. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the birch trees glittering like glass. She found Ekaterina in the small chapel at the far end of the estate, kneeling before a candle. He will live, Galina said softly. Ekaterina's shoulders shook. You saved him, she whispered. Not me. You brought the letter, Galina said. You decided. Ekaterina lifted her face, streaked with tears. What will happen now? That is for you to decide, Galina said. Ekaterina stared at the flickering candle. I do not know how to live with this. Then start by telling the truth, Galina said. To him. To yourself. Ekaterina bowed her head. Will you stay? She asked, her voice childlike. Please, when I speak to him? I will stay, Galina said. The candle's flame wavered, throwing shadows like wings against the chapel walls. Outside, the first hint of sunlight touched the snow, turning it to gold. By mid-morning, the estate had shaded its feverish hush and begun to stir like a waking giant. The kitchen clattered with Tayana's pans. The scent of baking black bread drifted up the staircase. Out in the courtyard, Pavel swept snow from the steps, his scarf pulled high over his mouth. But in the upstairs bedroom, the atmosphere was brittle as glass. Victor Morozov sat propped against a mound of pillows. His face still bore the pallor of winter earth, but his eyes were alive now, alert, guarded, skeptical. His hands once trembling, now flexed with slow strength, as though he were reacquainting himself with his own body. He sipped tea from a glass cup that Galina had prepared, black tea with honey and a sliver of lemon. just as he used to drink before his illness. Ekaterina hovered at the foot of the bed, her silk robe exchanged for a dark wool dress. Without makeup, she looked younger, almost fragile, but her chin remained lifted, her spine straight. Galina stood behind her silent, the letter folded in her apron pocket. Victor's gaze flicked between them. "You," he said to Galina, his voice gravelly but steady. "You saved me." Galina bowed her head. "I tried." His eyes narrowed. "From what?" The silence in the room was like a vacuum. Ekaterina's hands clasped together until the knuckles whitened. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then she drew a breath. "From me," she said. Victor's brow furrowed. "What nonsense is this?" Ekaterina stepped forward. "Pepa, I poisoned you." The words fell into the room like stones into deep water. The doctors, hovering nearby, looked at one another uneasily, then at Victor. Pavel paused in the doorway, stunned. Victor stared at his daughter, his lips parting but no sound emerging. The muscles in his jaw flicked like tiny electric currents. "Explain?" he said finally, his voice low. Ekaterina's chin trembled but did not lower. "I believed you killed Mama," she said. "I believed you stole from Uncle Mikhail. I believed you cared for everyone but me. I thought if you suffered, you would understand." Her eyes flicked to Galina. She found the letter. "She showed me. I know now I was wrong." Victor closed his eyes briefly, as though steadying himself against a blow. Then he opened them, a flicker of steel returning to his gaze. "So you tried to kill me based on a belief." "I was desperate," she whispered. "And I hated you." Victor was silent. The only sound was the tick of the clock on the mantel and the faint hiss of the samovar. Galina watched him, the great man who once crushed ministers under his boot. Now a father absorbing his daughter's confession. At last he spoke. "Your mother," he said slowly, "was the only person I could never command. Even on her deathbed, she refused to let you see her. She thought she was protecting you. She asked me to be distant so you would grow strong." His eyes glistened. "I did as she asked. Perhaps I did it too well." Ekaterina made a small sound, half sob, half laugh. "You locked me out of her room, Papa. I was 14. I pressed my ear to the door. I heard her cry your name. You never opened it." Victor looked at his hands. "I was ashamed. I thought if you saw her like that, you would hate me. I thought." He broke off, his voice failing. Galina stepped forward, placing the letter on the blanket before him. "She knows the truth now," she said softly. Victor touched the paper with his fingertips, but he did not unfold it. Instead, he looked at his daughter. "You have my blood," he said. "You are like me, proud, ruthless. But you are also like her. You cry at night. I heard you once, in your room." He drew a slow breath. "I will not call the police." Ekaterina's eyes widened. "Papa." "I will not," he repeated. "But you will leave the company. You will go away for a time. Paris, perhaps. Find some work, any work. You must learn what it means to stand on your own. When you return, we will see." Tears slid down Ekaterina's cheeks. "I don't want your money," she whispered. "I just wanted you to see me." Victor's lips twitched, almost a smile but too bitter. "Now I do," he said. Galina felt her throat tighten. She remembered her grandmother telling her, "Forgiveness is not clean. It is mud and snow mixed together. But it feeds the earth." She turned to leave, but Victor's voice stopped her. "Stay," he said. "Both of you. Drink tea." They sat together, an uneasy triangle, father-daughter, housekeeper. Galina poured tea into 3 glasses, placed them on saucers of thin porcelain. The tea steamed between them like a fragile bridge. Victor sipped first, then Ekaterina, then Galina. For a moment the room was quiet except for the soft clink of spoons. Outside the window the birch branches drooped under the weight of new snow. The world seemed suspended, waiting. "Galina," Victor said after a while, "why did you help me?" She hesitated. "Because my grandmother raised me to believe that every life has value, even the life of someone who has forgotten it. And because I saw your eyes, you were afraid." He nodded slowly. Fear, he said. Yes. Even though I feel it? Ekaterina looked at Galina. I owe you my father's life, she said softly. You owe him the truth, Galina replied. Victor's lips twitched again. She has given it, he said. Now we will see what grows from it. The day passed in muted truce. Doctors came and went. Tatiana brought trays of food but stayed quiet. The air of crisis dissolved into an air of aftermath, like the quiet after a blizzard. In the evening, the three of them gathered again in Victor's room. He asked for borscht, dark and steaming, with a dollop of sour cream. Galina fed him spoon by spoon, as though feeding a child. Ekaterina sat nearby, her eyes downcast, hands clasped. When Victor finished, he leaned back, closing his eyes. I built this house to keep the world out, he murmured. But the world came in anyway. Galina adjusted his pillow. It always does, she said. That night, Galina returned to her attic room. She sat by the window, watching the snow drift over the city like ash. Below in the courtyard, she saw Ekaterina walking alone, her coat wrapped tight, her breath rising in plumes. She looked like a girl who had lost her way home. Galina thought of leaving. She could go back to Arkhangelsk, to the sea winds and the wooden houses. But something held her. Perhaps it was an unfinished duty. Perhaps it was simply a habit. Perhaps it was compassion, which she had been taught was both a burden and a gift. She fell asleep with her shawl around her shoulders, dreaming of birch forests and cold rivers. The next morning, Victor asked to see her alone. She entered his room, where sunlight spilled across the carpet like liquid gold. He sat up, dressed in a wool robe, his eyes sharper. You could have walked away, he said. You could have watched me die. I could have. Galina agreed. Why didn't you? She hesitated. Because no one else saw. Zol, and because you once gave me work when no one would. Victor nodded. When I came to St. Petersburg with nothing, I thought only of steel, of profit. I forgot people. You reminded me. He reached to the bedside table and took a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a thin gold cross on a chain. This belonged to my mother, he said. Take it. Galina blinked. Startled. I cannot. You can, he said. You saved my life. She accepted it, feeling its weight, its warmth. Spasibo, she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment. Stay in this house if you wish, he said. Or leave. But know that from this day you are no longer just a servant. You are family. Her throat tightened. She bowed her head. I will stay for now, she said. Until you are strong. That evening, Ekaterina returned from a walk to the church nearby. Her eyes were red, but her face was calmer. She came to Galina in the kitchen, where the stove glowed red and the smell of pies filled the air. I prayed for Mama, she said softly. And for Papa. And for you. Galina wiped her hands on her apron. Prayer is good, she said. But action is better. Ekaterina managed a faint smile. I will go to Paris. I will work. I will try to become someone Mama would be proud of. She already is, Galina said gently. Ekaterina reached for Galina's hand, squeezing it. You changed everything, she whispered. Galina shook her head. The truth changed everything. Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the city, muffling the noise of cars, covering the scars of streets. In the Morozov estate, silence no longer felt like a threat, but like breathing space. Winter tightened its grip on St. Petersburg in the weeks that followed. The Neva lay sealed under glassy ice, the sky hung low and pewter, gray. In the Morozov estate, life rearranged itself with the quiet precision of snow drifting into new shapes. The 20 doctors, their reputation salvaged by a miracle they only half understood, packed their bags and left. Tatiana's kitchen fell back into its old rhythms of bread, tea, and borscht. The echo of boots in the marble hallway softened. Victor regained his strength slowly. By mid-January, he could stand on the balcony wrapped in a fur coat, staring at the frozen river like a general surveying a battlefield he had survived. His face had lost some of its former imperiousness. The lines at the corners of his eyes had deepened into something almost human. When he spoke now, his voice carried less command and more gravity, as though he had discovered the cost of words. Ekaterina prepared to leave for Paris. Letters of introduction were arranged, accounts were frozen. A modest apartment was secured for her in the Latin Quarter. She moved through the house collecting her clothes and books, her gestures quiet and deliberate. She no longer wore sable. She wrapped herself in a simple wool coat with a knitted scarf. At meals she spoke little, but when she looked at her father there was a flicker of something tender. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but the first thawing of it. Galina continued her work, but the work had changed. She no longer felt invisible. Victor addressed her by name, not as housekeeper. He asked for her opinion on the cooks on the estate, even on the rebuilding of his factory after the recent fire. She declined the offers of promotion or money. "I want only to finish my duty," she said, "and then I will go back north." He didn't argue. One evening, shortly before Ekaterina's departure, Victor summoned them both to the dining room. The samovar steamed on the sideboard. The long table had been cleared except for 3 glasses of tea and a small plate of black bread spread with caviar. A candle burned between them, the flame small and steady. "I wanted to say something before you go," Victor said to his daughter. "I built an empire, but it built walls between us. I cannot undo the past. I can only tell the truth now." He paused, looking at Galina. "This woman saved me when I deserved perhaps to die. She did not do it for money. She did it because she believed life can change." Ekaterina's eyes flicked to Galina, then back to her father. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "About you, about Mama, about everything." "You were hurt," Victor said. "Hurt people see only shadows." He reached across the table, laying his large hand over hers. "Paris is not punishment. It is a chance. Live there, work. Fall in love if you can. Learn who you are without me." She nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I will." Then Victor turned to Galina. "And you?" he said. "When you leave this house, you will not leave as a servant. You will leave as Galina Sidorovna Morozova, if you wish." Galina blinked. "I cannot take your name." "You already carry it in your courage," he said. "But as you like." She lowered her gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. "But I have my own name." They drank tea in silence, listening to the muffled city beyond the windows, the faraway toll of an Orthodox bell. The candle flickered between them like a fragile heart. The next morning, snow fell in wide, slow flakes, soft as feathers. Galina helped Ekaterina load her luggage into the car. Pavel drove it to the station where the Paris train waited, its windows glowing in the cold. Father and daughter embraced stiffly, then longer, and Victor slipped a small wooden cross into her palm. "Your mother's," he said simply. She pressed it to her lips and boarded the train. Galina stood beside Victor on the platform, watching the train vanish into the white distance. The sound of the wheels echoed like a memory. Victor exhaled, a long, clouded breath. "She is stronger than I was at her age," he murmured. "Maybe she will survive what I could not." They drove back to the estate without speaking. Inside, the halls felt hollow, the marble floors echoing their footsteps. The absence of Ekaterina, of doctors, of crisis, left a space that felt both peaceful and immense. That night Victor went to the small chapel at the far end of the estate, the one where Ekaterina had knelt weeks before. Galina found him there an hour later, sitting on a bench before the candle rack, his hands folded like a schoolboy's. She hesitated, then sat beside him. "I was raised Orthodox," he said softly, "but I forgot the prayers. My mother prayed enough for us both. Now I come here and I don't know what to say." "Silence is also a prayer," Galina murmured. He looked at her. "What about you? Do you pray?" She thought of her grandmother's chants of icons and herbs and whispered names. "Sometimes," she said. "In 2 languages. I don't know which one God hears." He gave a faint, tired smile. "Maybe both." They sat in silence. The candles flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. Victor spoke again, his voice low. I built steel to last forever. But nothing lasts, not even steel. Only the small kindnesses, maybe. Only the hands that hold us up when we are falling. Galina felt her throat tighten. That is true, she said. Weeks passed. Victor continued to recover. He went walking in the snowy garden, his fur coat brushing the bare branches. Sometimes he invited Galina to walk with him, telling her stories of his childhood in a wooden house on the outskirts of Yaroslavl, of his mother making kasha, of his father's silence. She listened without judgment. In these walks, something shifted between them. Not love, not quite, but a mutual recognition of loneliness. In March, the ice began to crack on the Neva. Water lapped at the edges, black and cold. Victor stood at the balcony railing, watching the thaw. Everything breaks, he murmured. Ice, hearts, empires. Galina brought him tea in a glass holder etched with St. Basil spires. Everything also flows, she said. Water, forgiveness, life. He looked at her, eyes glinting. You speak like a priest, he said. Or a poet, she shrugged. I speak like a housekeeper. Spring crept into the city, slow and reluctant. Birch buds swelled. Orthodox bells rang louder. Letters arrived from Paris. Short, formal at first, then longer, warmer. Ekaterina wrote of small jobs at a publishing house, of walking by the sign, of learning to cook for herself. She enclosed sketches of bridges, of street lamps, of her own face drawn with hesitant lines. Victor read them aloud to Galina in the evenings, his voice soft, as though tasting a new language. One evening in April, Victor handed Galina a letter from Mikhail, the estranged brother. It was brief but startling. I hear you are alive. I hear you have changed. I am coming to see. Victor stared at it for a long time, then folded it carefully. Perhaps it is time, he said. On the day Mikhail arrived, the house smelled of polish and fresh bread. A thin man with a lined face and kind eyes stepped out of the car. Victor went down the steps slowly, extending his hand. Mikhail took it. For a moment they looked like two boys who had fought and grown old without ever making peace. Then they embraced awkwardly. That evening they sat at the table with Galina, Tatiana, and Pavel. All together for the first time. They ate borscht with sour cream, black bread, and smoked fish. They drank tea from the samovar. The conversation was quiet, halting, but it carried a new note of possibility. In their faces Galina saw a kind of rough grace, the chance, at last, to be human with one another. Later, when the guests had gone and the dishes were washed, Galina stepped out into the courtyard. The snow had melted into rivulets. The air smelled of wet earth and distant lilac. Above her, the sky glowed pale violet, streaked with clouds. She felt the small gold cross Victor had given her warm against her skin. She thought of the first day she entered this house. A black girl from the Russian north, invisible, uncertain. She thought of the billionaire gasping on the bed, the doctors helpless, the daughter filled with rage. She thought of her grandmother's words. Sometimes it is not the doctor you need, but the listener. Inside the chapel, a single candle burned. She went to it, lighting another beside it. She did not pray for herself, but for all of them. Victor, Ekaterina, Mikhail, Tana, Pavel, and even the doctors. She whispered the words in Russian, and then in the soft, lilting tongue her grandmother had taught her, letting them mingle like two rivers joining. When she stepped outside, Victor was standing there, his fur coat open despite the chill. You're leaving soon, he said. Yes, she said. Back to Arkhangelsk. The sea is calling me. He nodded slowly. I will not stop you. She smiled faintly. I know. He looked at her with something like sorrow. You changed everything, he said quietly. She shook her head. The truth changed everything. I only carried it. They stood in silence, the evening wind stirring their coats. Then Victor spoke again, his voice almost lost in the breeze. I used to believe power was the ability to take. Now I think it is the ability to give. You taught me that. She met his eyes. Then don't forget it. The following morning, she packed her small suitcase, 2 dresses, a shawl, a tin of tea, the gold cross. So Pavel drove her to the station. Victor did not come. He sent a note instead, tucked into her coat pocket. On the train, she opened it. It reads simply, "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. V." The train lurched forward, carrying her northward. Through the window, she watched the frozen fields recede, the birch trees flick past like silent witnesses. She felt no triumph, no bitterness, only a quiet certainty that life, like the Russian winter, was harsh but capable of sudden, luminous thaws. She closed her eyes and remembered Victor's face, the night she gave him the charcoal and milk, his trembling hand clutching hers. She remembered Ekaterina kneeling by the candle, whispering prayers she didn't know she still knew. She remembered her grandmother's voice, far away. Compassion is the only wealth that grows when you spend it. Snow flurried past the window, then sunlight broke through, gilding the rails. Galina placed her hand over the gold cross at her neck and whispered, half in Russian, half in the old tongue, "May the truth heal what power could not." And as the train carried her away, she felt something inside her lift, like ice breaking on a river. A soundless crack, then flow, then freedom. In the end, Victor Morozov survives not because of the power of money or the brilliance of 20 doctors, but because one unseen woman dares to look beyond the surface and act with courage. Ekaterina, who tried to destroy her father, discovers the truth of his past and begins the slow path toward forgiveness, exiling herself to Paris to find a life of her own. Victor, humbled, learns that strength is not in steel or fortune, but in admitting his failures and extending grace. Galina, the housekeeper who has always been invisible, walks away quietly, carrying no reward, but a gold cross and the knowledge that compassion can unmake cycles of cruelty. As she rides the train north, she understands that sometimes the deepest changes happen in silence, in kitchens, in sick rooms, where love or mercy steps in unseen. The story closes on that train, with Galina leaving St. Petersburg, the snow thawing into water, her heart free, and the Morozov family forever changed by the simple, unremarkable act of being seen.